Well, because it is easier to give you an example of a variable, I'm giving you an example of a variable. But you need to understand that a compiler, when it is compiling a code, and when I actually execute the machine code in that phase as well, a programming language needs to understand what exactly is the lifetime of a particular object. And if the object is live, then only I should be able to refer it to that particular object. So I can always refer to a programming object when it is live. What is what do I say that when do I say that object is live? Whenever there is a time between the creation and destruction of the name to object binding, that is called as the lifetime of the object. So object lifetime, please understand, is not a continuous time representation. My object may be live for certain duration of the time in the execution of a code, and during certain part execution of the code, the object may not be live. ओके तो ये कंटिन्यूअस नहीं रहता. अगर मैं ऑब्जेक्ट का लाइफ टाइम एक लाइन से, स्ट्रेट लाइन से दिखाना चाहता हूँ कि is my, say suppose in this example itself, here I want to say that is outer A alive, so मैं लिखता हूँ outer A live. Okay, so this line outer A is live. What about this line outer A is live? Yes, it is live. Okay, what about this place? It is live. Okay, but in this what about this line? It is live. What about this line? It is live. What about this line? It is live. So some sort of this kind of analysis your compiler needs to do in order to understand which variable has a scope while it is executing a certain part of the code, and while it is executing some other part of the code, what other variable has a life. So now if I'm writing creating a chain of life for the variable A, you will see that this chain will break down at this line in the static code. So this is my static code. At the time of execution, whenever I am executing line number 1, so execution straight away में बहुत बार नहीं होता, बहुत बार में zigzag तरीके से होता है, जैसा यहाँ होगा. I'll start executing line number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 जैसा मैं line execute करूंगा, तो I would understand that it is just a definition of a function. So there is nothing to execute as such. I'll just pass on these lines. And as I reach this line number 13, I will realize that there is a function called made to function f2. And I will take my control back again over here. तो ये जो हो रहा है, that is execution trace. This is called as execution trace. So execution trace goes like this. I start with line number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Then back to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Again 13, then 14, 15. This is the way this program is going to get executed if I call function f1. Okay. Obviously, we'll start with line number 17. So execution trace कैसे होगा इस particular छोटे code का? I'll start with executing this first, then this, then this. To execute this completely, I will jump to line number 1. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 जो मैंने अभी बताया आपको, that will be the execution trace. That is a runtime trace of execution. Runtime trace यानी execution के steps कैसे होते हैं code के. That is referred to as execution trace. Now what we are currently trying to get is ये जो मेरा static code है line number 1 से लेके 15 तक, वो static code में, static क्यों बोल रहा हूँ क्योंकि code change नहीं होता, execution trace change होता है. मैं उस code को कैसे execute करता हूँ वो trace change होता है. मेरा static code कभी change नहीं होता. It remains like that only. Okay, so ये static code जो मेरा है उसमें अगर मैं एक वेरिएबल का लाइफ कब है, वेरिएबल लाइव कब है, वेरिएबल डेड कब है, ये आइडेंटिफाई करूं तो आपको दिखेगा कि ये जो लाइफ लाइन है, अगर ये लाइन खींचूं, सपोज एब्स्ट्रैक्टली ये एक मैं लाइन खींच रहा हूं, तो मेरा वेरिएबल ए का जो लाइन रहेगा वो यहाँ तक ही रहेगा. उसके बाद वो लाइन डिसकंटिन्यू हो जाएगा until I reach line number 13. 13, 14, 15 it will be again drawn. And 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, again variable A is dead. It is not live. So this life line जो मैं यहाँ पे निकाल रहा हूँ, जो discontinuous line है यहाँ पे, For certain variables, it may not be a discontinuous line. It may be a continuous line right from the place where it is defined up to where it is dead. Okay, that line is referred to as scope of, that line is referred to as the scope of the variable. So जहां पे variable का उसके नाम के साथ, वेरिएबल का नहीं सॉरी, प्रोग्रामिंग ऑब्जेक्ट का उसके नाम के साथ एसोसिएशन वैलिड है, okay, that particular part of the code is called as the place where variable has a scope. Scope means variable को वहां पे यूज करने की गुंजाइश है. So I can use the variable over there because the variable means that the programming object over there, because the programming object's name is associated with the representation that it is trying to represent, and hence the representation is live. I can use it in my program. So that is called as scope of a programming object. So we'll see some examples now today in order to understand what do you mean by a scope. So I'm jumping from those slides to these notes, which I'll be sharing with you after this lecture is over. So we are talking about what are different scope rules with respect to programming language. Okay, what are different scope rules with respect to programming language? What is a scope? That's the first question you should ask. So we started off discussing three things: binding, names, and scope. So the third thing, that is what we are talking about. These three things are integrated together. Any programming object will have a name. That is the naming convention. Why we require name? Because we want to refer to a programming object. Okay, fine. Name का relation मुझे समझ में आया programming के साथ. What about the second thing? Binding. Whenever the name gets associated with the object that it is representing, that is called as binding. Understood what is binding? Now the scope tells me when the name and the associated object are actually live. That is what will be defined by scope rules. So a scope set of scope rules in a programming language decides when in the program a particular binding is active. So textual region of the program, textual region and a static region, code ka static region in which the binding is active is called as scope. Binding is active is called as scope. In modern languages, the scope of the binding is determined statically, that is at compile time. क्योंकि compile time पे आपका प्रोग्राम एग्जीक्यूट नहीं हो रहा है, तो इसलिए मैं कोड को आपने देखा होगा, मैं बोला था ये स्टैटिक है, इट्स नॉट चेंजिंग. The word static means nothing is changing. The code execution is not being done. और dynamic का word use होगा when I'm referring to the runtime. So we said that various types of binding in these slides. Actually, yesterday I told you that binding time decisions can be done at these different times when I'm using a programming objects. Certain objects will be bound to its name when I'm doing language design. Certain programming objects would be bound to the name when I'm implementing the language. Okay, when I'm writing the program, at that time I will bind certain names to their particular objects. While writing the implementation of the program means designing of the program, and then program writing means I'm writing the program. Actual program is getting written at that time, and then the compile time. So all these are these places where I'm doing static binding. Okay, whereas this place onwards जो भी हो रहा है वो binding होगा dynamic binding, because at that time things will be changing dynamically. So let us go back to the notes. Okay, so what is binding? Binding is the region of the program in which, sorry, what is scope? Scope is the textual region of the program in which binding is active. So this word active means it's live. So the binding is live. वो नेम उसी ऑब्जेक्ट को एसोसिएट हो चुका है. ऐसा जब आप बोलोगे, जिस रीजन में बोलोगे प्रोग्राम, वो प्रोग्राम का रीजन उस पर्टिकुलर ऑब्जेक्ट के लिए उसका स्कोप रहेगा. फॉर इंस्टेंस, in this program, if I'm talking about an object called as function f1, तो आपको दिखेगा कि function f1 सभी ब्लॉक्स के बाहर है. सभी ब्लॉक्स के बाहर है मतलब it doesn't it is not defined inside any of the other blocks. मेरा पूरा का पूरा प्रोग्राम में F1 का जो डेफिनेशन है वो ग्लोबल डेफिनेशन है, हेंस इसका स्कोप होगा मेरा पूरा फाइल में. मेरा पूरा फाइल में कोई भी दूसरा फंक्शन होने दो, अगर यहाँ पे कुछ और एक फंक्शन होता, say F3, and I have written the code of F3 here, I could have easily called F1 from here, and there is no problem to my compiler because F1 has a scope throughout my file. Whereas, can I call F2 over here? Just a question to you, can I call F2 here inside this function F3? Can I call F2 from here? You will say no. Okay, if you can't answer, don't answer, no issues, but you will say that no, you can't call F2 because F2 will only be live when I will make a call to F1. Whenever I make a call to F1, then only F2 will be live. Okay, so I cannot make this call. I cannot make this call. The reason behind that is F2 is not in the scope. So this line, basically we say that F2 is not in the scope, but basically line number 20 in my file is where F2 is not having an active binding. And since it is not having active binding, I cannot refer to it. As I cannot refer to it, I cannot make a call to it. It is a function, so I should make a call to make use of that object. Okay? समजते तुम्हाला काय चालू आहे ते. सो जसं व्हेरिएबलला स्कोप असतो तसं फंक्शनलाही स्कोप असतो, तसंच मॉड्यूललाही स्कोप असतो, तसंच लायब्ररीलाही स्कोप असतो. सो इफ आय इन्क्लूड अ लायब्ररी त्याचा स्कोप सुरू होतो. whenever I write hash include in here and I include something, okay, I don't know what I am including, so I include something, the scope of or the association between this and the functions which are defined inside come over here. Otherwise they are, I can't use them, right? Then I can use some utility in that. So if this is rather than random, it should be some, say, what is that, stdio.h. Okay, then I can actually use certain printf here because this is global, this declaration is global, it has a global scope. I can use it here, I can use it here, anywhere in any block in this block of code in this particular file. Okay, I'm giving you a C example because you are aware of C programming language, that's why. So this is what the scope rules are determining. Scope rules are telling me you can use any object, the scope is defining the region in the program, the static region in the program where you can use a particular binding. बाइंडिंग किस लिए चाहिए, क्योंकि मुझे वो ऑब्जेक्ट को यूज करना है. अगर नेम बाउंड होगा तो ही मैं वो ऑब्जेक्ट को रेफर कर सकूंगा और रेफर करने का जो भी सिंटैक्स होगा उससे मैं उस पर्टिकुलर ऑब्जेक्ट को यूज कर सकूंगा. सो दैट इज व्हाट इज referred to as a scope rule. So scope rules in a programming language decides what, whether the binding is active or not. Okay, the example in C, new scope introduces upon entry. So C में scope rules कैसे होते हैं? So these are the three scope rules generally followed by C programming language. Okay, as far as the scope of definition of objects are concerned. So जब भी कोई subroutine में आप enter करते हो, so a new scope is introduced upon entry to a subroutine. Now what is